Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. On the show today, your questions answered. We're going through and clearing out the Crash MotoGP inbox to get anything and everything answered, and there really is a massive wide variety of questions to go through. So, we'll dive straight in, shall we? The recording date is Tuesday the 30th of May. My name is Harry Benjamin. As always, Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren is here, and former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Huewen. Let's start. Question number one, shall we? Of I don't know, about 150. Nelson asks, I'm a huge fan of the pod, thanks Nelson, and I sit so patiently each and every week to listen. As the popularity of F1 has only been exploding here in the US with the additions of Miami and Las Vegas coming in, do we think the US will add another Grand Prix on the MotoGP calendar? Do you think the US would need an American rider on the grid to get behind that and possibly justify it? What do you reckon, Keith?
I reckon that it's on the move in America. Moto America, Wayne Rainey's series, if you want to call it that, is emerging now, isn't it? It's got reasonable backing. It's had 2 or 3 years behind it now, so it's on the move. It comes down to money again, and MotoGP business model isn't the same as F1. F1 has exploded in recent months, years, purely and simply because of their online presence and the fact that their multimedia, the digital side, their digital platform has become so good. The drive to survive situation has been fantastic for Formula One. And as I've said so many times before on this pod, it's Formula One is 50% for fans of Formula One and the tech heads, and 50% of people who want to be seen there. And that makes a massive difference. And Americans, with respect, seem to be a little bit that way inclined. They want to be among winners. They want to be seen at the big event. We're a bit more reticent like that in the UK, aren't we? We're all a bit, dour in comparison, I think, to the hee-hawing and whooping American that's jumping about somewhere in the circuit of the Americas just to be seen under an American flag in the middle of an event. It really is the TikTok bloody Instagram paradise that people like in Formula One. We don't have that in MotoGP. God knows why, because it's, well, dare I say it, from a spectacle point of view, it's a better sport. If you're into watching a sport, I mean, I watched Monaco at the weekend. Mate, I'd love to be sat on a boat in Monaco, but I'd be asleep watching that.
The rain came down.
It was probably one of the more exciting Monacos as well, but the fact of the matter is that it was still very, very dull if you compare it with a MotoGP race. Yeah. And based on that very fact, we ought to have a much bigger social media presence, in my view. And we don't. And I think that would appeal to the Americans. Until we get to the point where we've got it right on that selling feature, that unique selling point, the USP of MotoGP, we're not really increasing the numbers. It's only really Le Mans that's shocked us all at the moment with the amount of people at trackside. And that is because it is a hands-on event, and the promoter is brilliant at getting that type of people ring-fenced inside the circuit for a great event. Not everyone's cup of tea, though, I've got to say.
Yeah, you've got to take your hat off to Formula One, haven't you? Because the track action, to my mind, as someone who's a very casual viewer, hasn't really changed in the last, 10 years. But the fan base, fantastic, isn't it? You can see it's got visibly bigger. People are talking about it. It's in the mainstream newspapers more, TV, that kind of thing. So, yeah, as he says, when you've got the show that's there in MotoGP on the track, you think, well, why can't we get more of that off it? Because, as you say, Keith, it is about money, isn't it? And a lot of the new tracks that we see are government-backed, aren't they? The new Grand Prix that come on the calendar, they're government-backed. And that's not going to happen in America, is it, really? It's not. You can't really rely on that, let's say. I mean, you can hope to try and get some budget from some local, maybe sports authority or something like that. But by and large, it's not going to be like, the Thai Grand Prix is backed by the Thai government, or the Malaysian Grand Prix, or India that's coming on, those kind of things where you've got high up government support for a MotoGP event. And that's really the easiest way to make things happen as far as an event, isn't it? If you want, what's the best way to get a MotoGP event happening, a new MotoGP event, that's the way you'd want to do it. So it's not going to be easy to do that anywhere in America or even Western Europe really now. So you've got to look at getting the money in other ways. And that's, as Keith says, getting the people on board. America's such a big country, maybe you could, there's certainly room for it, isn't there, geographically, but it's having that interest, having someone that comes along that can believe in the sport and make the numbers add up. I mean, Laguna Seca, fantastic track, but, could you make it happen there again? I don't know. But for Nelson's question, we'd all love to see another event in America that's certainly big enough it would justify it. But fortunately, it comes down to the boring numbers game again.
And we're tending to move towards Asia, the Asian market, where millions and millions of people are motorcyclists. There's miles more cars in America than there are bikes, of course. And America has never been a great road scene. It's been an off-road scene. It's been motocross. It's been dirt track. It's been more of an off-road scene than it's ever been a tarmac type scene. You got Alabama. The track at Alabama, great little track, and with a great museum and a great bike following. But Barber Motorsport Park is never ever going to really be a Grand Prix track either. But there you go. It's a bit like the UK track-wise. There's a lot of tracks in America that are great to ride on and great to go and watch at, but they're not safe to Grand Prix standard.
Well, you bring up the UK. Thank you, Nelson, for that question. Tufty from Northern Ireland has asked this. My question is, apart from Jake Dixon and Sam Lowes, where do you see the next British MotoGP rider coming from? We've produced so many great riders over the years, but there seems to be a lack of British talent being promoted or talked about at the moment. Superbike has so many great British riders, yet MotoGP has none since Crutchlow retired. Interesting in hearing your thoughts on the matter. P.S. Keith did a brilliant job with this year's Northwest 200 commentary. Loved every minute. Maybe we should send Glenn Owen to MotoGP. That would spice things up a bit.
Yeah, he didn't like it much when we were at dinner one night, and I was up on stage with Stephen Watson from BBC Northern Ireland, and Stephen asked me what my prediction was for the race, and I said Alistair Seeley. That went down like a proverbial lead brick. And then my next interview was Glenn Owen, so it was quite good fun. Pete.
It's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, we're not the only ones. We should say the Brits. The Germans are asking the same thing. I mean, just to throw it, it's not just a British thing. That it was Stefan Bradl and Jonas Folger were both at a race because they were replacements this year, weren't they? And Bradl said, "Look, I can't see where the next German MotoGP rider is coming from." So this is the case for a lot of countries out there. We've got. In the UK, the difference or the unique thing is, as you highlight with the question there, the superbike presence and the background is so strong, and yet, as we know, it's very difficult to get across. And it comes in a way a bit back to American riders. They're also very strong in superbikes, as we've seen over the years, haven't we? But again, it's trying to get countries that have a background in superbike racing, super sport racing, to make that move over to MotoGP. Rather than coming up on pocket bikes and the whole Grand Prix ladder as they do in Europe, Keith.
You just hit the nail on the head there with the pocket bike situation. I've been doing a bit of research on this over the last week or so when we spoke about the women's series and so on and so forth, and kids coming through, and now we haven't got the big pond that we need to pick some of these quick riders from, like they have in Italy, like they have in Spain. And it's a complete mess in this country. In the UK, I'm talking here. Sorry if you're further afield and don't have the same problem, if you're lucky enough not to have the same problem. But our ACU, the Autocycle Union as is, don't seem to want to get involved. They kind of seem to be right in the background. And, that reminds me of Homer disappearing in that hedge when you mentioned sort of youngsters. They stay well away from the contentious issue of getting involved in something that might cause them a pain down the road. And the reason I say that is because when you've got youngsters riding on motorcycles of any size, that can be an issue that there's going to be some litigation or some kind of trauma later on in because motorbike racing at any level can be dangerous. And you can't always mitigate against that. No real tracks in this country. I've tried to follow up on the Silverstone track. You may remember that we talked about the new kart track that they're building there, and I've already spoken to Stuart Pringle, their managing director, about youngsters and the pool of youngsters. Will this track be used for mini bike racing, like some kart tracks are? And he definitely thought about it. But since then, having looked into it a bit further, and I think Silverstone's probably done the same thing, is damage done to kart tracks through motorbikes falling off, with their foot pegs gouging the tarmac and the like, has a costly consequence to running bikes on a kart track. And if it's whatever the grade A karting Grand Prix track would be homologation-wise, which you presume Silverstone will be going for when they do eventually. They haven't signed it off yet. It's still not done. When they do eventually get to do that kart, to have a load of motorbikes running around there and gouging great big chunks out the tarmac, that's a problem. On the big track, if you get a car accident that gouges a big chunk out of the tarmac, or a track day where you've got a motorbike that's thrown up the road and it gouges a chunk out of that tarmac has to be fixed. If you're a Formula One, track, there are certain things that you have to do to make sure that track is in pristine condition. So the cost element is quite high. Then you come to licensing. The reason why we have so many pocket bikes on kart tracks is because those kart tracks don't have an ACU license. There's no licensing. You don't need a license to go to for your youngster to go riding around most of these kart tracks. Whereas that would change, presumably, if we were running on affiliated tracks. So there's a massive black hole in the UK as to what any organiser, anybody can really do to organise these pocket races. Peter Hickman runs a series for an academy. Laverty is obviously a man that we've looked at with academies. There are other people out there that are quite astute when it comes to running these small academies, but there's nothing joined up, is what I'm trying to say in a very long way. There's no coordinated effort to make sure that our youngsters, if their parents or themselves are keen to go mini bike racing, there doesn't seem to be an overarching safe environment, both track-wise, licensing-wise, insurance-wise, to get them involved. That seems to be a real disaster from my perspective. I'm going to find out more what happens in Italy, for instance. You've got all those areas around where Valentino Rossi lives, of course, where they've got pocket racing tracks all over the place. Now, are they licensed? What's the situation? Are they just freelance? You just turn up and run what you've brung and have a great time? I wonder what it is as far as their step ladder is concerned into, professional racing. We need to find out. Somebody needs to find out, because we don't seem to be doing it quite right here in the UK for females or for males for that point, or anybody in between.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, Tufty, thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for your question. And actually, on the subject of tracks as well, talking about American new tracks and the many tracks that we have here in the UK, but the ones that aren't quite usable. Tony asks, greetings from sunny Croatia. Nice to listen to your podcast. I have a question for Keith, because he was there at the time. What about Grobnik racetrack in Croatia, then the Yugoslavian GP, built especially for MotoGP in 1978 and was on the calendar every year in mid-June till the Yugoslav War started in 1990. The last winter was rainy in front of Schwanz. Proper bike racetrack Grobnik is now freshly resurfaced with new tarmac. Adriatic coast is warm and full of motorbikes, but interest in the Balkan side of it doesn't seem to be quite there at the moment with MotoGP.
Fantastic area, Croatia, anyway. I mean, you're right, the Yugoslavian Grand Prix. I did race in the Yugoslavian Grand Prix just outside Rijeka.
God, you are old, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. And you know what? I'm really proud of it.
Yeah.
I've had a good life, and it continues that way. And but it makes you sad sometimes when you, even with age and knowledge and still that little bit of aggression that I have, you still can't make things happen sometimes. And they're done for reasons why, when you're younger, you think, why the hell it seems obvious that you should be doing this. In Croatia, it's a beautiful place. Why are we not racing in the former Yugoslavia, now Croatia, and all those other Balkan states around there that have beautiful roads, beautiful places to stay, beautiful places to eat. You can access it by plane, boat, road, any way you want to. The problem is the market has moved. The market has moved. Dorna's market has moved at the end of the day. It's gone, further east. The interest in Europe, it comes down to European riders, European tracks, European pocket mini bikes. None of it is being catered for as well as it should be. And other places have picked up the pace on that. And the funding, as Pete's already said, that you get from governments in so many different racetracks now. Sepang, there's no way that Sepang would be Sepang if it hadn't had a fair amount of money come into it, either from Petronas or other places as well. I mean, commercial money as well in there. You just can't do it. It is just huge. Silverstone is 15 minutes from my house. I have many conversations about Silverstone, and you just think, how on earth do they survive on an annual basis? If it wasn't for Formula One, I suspect they wouldn't survive. They've had to sell off so much land around. I mean, just take the car parks. I mean, we all complain about the car parks, but most of those car parks outside Silverstone don't belong anymore to Silverstone. They were sold off ages ago for various reasons, and it just makes it impossible to do something at a reasonable price. And I think that as Dorna and the organisations have moved further to the east, where there is still a bit of money and a bit of interest for motorcycling. And Sepang is probably a good example. I mean, Sepang dumped F1 for MotoGP, allegedly. That's what I was led to believe. They let F1 go for MotoGP because in that region, MotoGP is a big one. It's a big seller. And there's a cap there. You have to remember as well, there's a financial cap to people who can go to races. You know, you can't charge 300 quid for a ticket for a guy that lives in Malaysia because a normal family just cannot afford that kind of level. So, you know, Formula One probably had a cap on it anyway, unless you flew in. I mean, the good thing about that's the other thing. Sepang, 15 minutes from the airport, you just go around the block. As you fly in, you can see the race circuit as you're flying in. You know, if we had, Brands Hatch was safer. That place would be rammed forever. Just down the road from the London conurbation. Money. It's all about the money.
It all comes down to money, Pete, as well. But it's not just this. I remember in the news the last week, Valtteri Bottas thinking of reviving the Kimi Ring in Finland as well. So that could be something on the cards. But again, they're bankrupt and no money.
Well, they've kind of halfway got there, haven't they? They got a bit further than the Circuit of Wales, which was just a mat. So it was one of those ones where I always wonder why people with huge amounts of money don't do better for the greater good. You know, that goes, you can spread that out to everything you want to spread it out to. Why do we have homeless people? Why do we have things like this, that, and the other? And the same thing with racetracks. Why don't people that have massive influence and massive money do a bit more for the sports and the regimes that have probably earned them that money in the first place? So good on Valtteri.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pete.
I mean, as you say, the Kimi Ring was a classic example, wasn't it, of just the money situation, wasn't it? That was as you say, the track was built. Okay, there was a bit of concern about the layout of the track because it was a bit tight and that kind of thing, but it was built. There was a racetrack there, and they had a test. There's some test riders there and everything else. But the money, if the money's not there, it can't happen. And they had a deal with Dorna, let's say, or an intention to join the MotoGP calendar. Even with that, it's so difficult, isn't it? It's so difficult to put on a new event in Europe or any Western country these days for the reasons that Keith mentioned. You go to Asia, you've got the double whammy, if you like, of all of the motorbike sales and the big crowds. So, you've got both sides of the equation. Whereas in Western Europe, we haven't got the big motorcycle sales. We can still get the big crowd sometimes, but the bike sales are not there. I think India is now and no coincidence we're going to India. India is now I heard at the last Grand Prix I was at, I think it's the biggest motorbike market in the world now. It's overtaken Indonesia. So that's where we're going. I mean, it is very hard if you haven't got something, either the big market for the bikes or the massive crowd that will buy all the tickets. Without both of those things, ideally, it's a struggle now, isn't it?
We'll all be riding Royal Enfield soon, Indian ones. That's where Harris Performance went. Harris Performance were bought by Royal Enfield, which is an Indian company. So Stephen Lester Harris and Steve Bayford, the three men behind Harris Performance, originally did extra chassis for Royal Enfield. We're tweaking their chassis for their new brands and stuff like that. So Royal Enfield, which is an old British name that is now Indian, had the benefit of the Harris Performance touch.
I was stuck on the M25 over the weekend, and I was just thinking, it came to my thoughts. A couple of motorcycles went by me, and I just thought, God, I should get a motorcycle bike like license, because then I'd be there in a heartbeat. I wouldn't be having these anxious issues about trying to get through in the traffic. So I need to buy one.
You have a whole load of other issues when you try and get through the traffic, like idiots trying to knock you off.
That's also, some of them did come very close to my stationary car, and I was like, oh, hello, sorry. Anyway, let's. We had a few voice note questions come in, so let's go to them now. First of all, we got a question from Phil.
Hi guys, so my question is, Bary Baltus in Moto2 has a very Joey the Lob-esque helmet. I was wondering if it's based on that or if that's completely random. As I'm sure you can tell by my accent, I have a real connection to Joey. So, yeah. Cheers. Love the podcast and keep up the good work.
Everybody has a connection to Joey. Doesn't matter whether you come from Ulster or not. Now, If it is a connection, and I don't know, to be honest. I mean, Bary Baltus, with a name like Barry, you got to think that he's got a link there somewhere as well, haven't you? Really, there's one or two that have got tenuous links to old racers and the like. But when it comes to helmet design, you couldn't get one much simpler than a yellow hat with a bit of black masking tape from front to back. I mean, that was Joey. It was just perfect, straight over the top. You knew exactly who it was. But again, it comes down to marketing and moving on. New helmet designs, a bit like in football where they change the shirt kit designs every other year or whatever it might be. Just because you can sell them on, it's all about marketing new product and getting that turnover gone. But whether it was a nod to Joey, let's hope so. Because if it is, then Bary Baltus has gone up in my estimations even further, if that's the case. You can't beat a bit of history. You speak to some riders and you wouldn't think that they know the kind of history they do about people like Joey Dunlop. You would think that there would be, apart from the fact that he was the king of the roads as was back in the day and the way that he was as a charitable fellow and the like when in the country he lost his life in as well, that is a lot more to Joey Dunlop than I think has ever been written. And I wonder why that is, why we don't have a Joey Dunlop film. There you go.
You should make it, Keith.
I tell you need a translation with Joey. If he hadn't been talking to us for more than you needed Joey to sort of get into the slightly more anglicised English than Ballymoney, because it was very hard to understand him when he was amongst his own, shall we say. Slowly but surely, you tuned in and he came back to you. He was a brilliant, brilliant man, and obviously exceptional in what he did, and a massive loss to Northern Ireland particularly, but of course the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, I don't know for sure either. Let's hope it is. I mean, it'd be great if it was. He wouldn't be the first, would he? Remember Roberto Rolfo? He put on a Joey Dunlop replica helmet, I think for the British round at Donington Park a few years back, and maybe some other races. So yeah, there's obviously, as Keith says, there's a lot of history there on the continent that people, they are big fans of him, and that'd be great. I'll try and find that out.
There you go. Pete's got some homework to do. Let's go to Steve next. Hello, Steve.
Guys, Steve from Victoria, Australia, or as Keith likes to call it, the nanny state. My question is in regards to Jack Miller. It seems as though over his GP career, Jack seems to qualify well, go to the front early in races, and then fade to finish just inside the top 10, often citing tyre issues. Do you guys think this is a fair assessment? And Keith, is this something that can be changed? If so, how? And not a criticism of Jack, guys, just interested to hear your thoughts. Keep up the good work.
Jack's a great rider and a great personality, and he still seems to be working it out at the minute. I mean, basically jumped on that KTM now, which makes a difference again because there's a whole new learning curve. Tyre wear, it's just such a tiny nuance in your weapon of talent that you've got to have. It is the hardest thing when you can't quite go back to Danny Pedrosa, couldn't quite make the front work. Go back to one or two other riders, couldn't make the rear work. Then if you were on a Yamaha, when the fuel load went down, front don't work one way and rear don't work in the other way once the fuel moves. It is just the tiniest differences. Jack will work it out because despite the fact he seems like he's Jack the lad, he's a clever bloke and he knows what he's got to do and he will be working around it. I think he will get there. KTM's still pretty new to him anyway. The other thing you've got to remember is there's so little time to get these things done. Very few riders in the course of a weekend get a lot of laps in one run nowadays. There's no time for it. You've got P1, P2, which is really qualifying all the way through. You've got no session that isn't a qualifying session nowadays to get somewhere to be in the best position as far as the grid position is concerned. And grid position is everything and isn't everything. If you've got a fast motorbike over one lap, that's great, but it isn't going to do you any good over 23 or whatever it is, like we've got coming up in Mugello. It's, I think he'll get there, Jack will. I definitely think Jack will get there, and I think the people around him at KTM are smart, they're clever, they're working towards it. They've got, Binder is not a million miles away differential-wise with how aggressively he rides a motorbike, but yet gently how he keeps a rear tyre into towards the end of it. I think that the data that everyone's gathering as a huge group will benefit Jack, and I think he will get around it eventually.
Yeah, I think that the question was absolutely spot on in terms of Jack's time at Ducati. That was what you would hear from Ducati, that was the area where Jack needed to work on. The big question, as Keith says, is what happens now at KTM? Different bike. Jack's already says he can slide the bike more than he could at Ducati, where it didn't like, it liked being wheels in line more. Maybe that's the area thing again, who knows? But the KTM, you can slide it more. And we've seen that with Brad Binder, haven't we? And as Keith says also, the tyre performance thing is such a tricky one. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, oh, well, maybe Jack works the tyres harder, but then that same skill, if you like, comes into play when he goes out there on a damp track and is instantly fast and instantly on the pace. So, maybe, that what works in one situation can work against you in another. It all depends on the weather and the type of conditions. And but it certainly wouldn't be a coincidence if, we know Jack is phenomenal when there's dodgy conditions and it's a bit wet and everyone else is a bit cautious. And he's just flat out and finding the grip. But then maybe on days when it's baking hot, finding that grip and working the tyres harder might sort of work against him a bit. It's such a tricky one. But as Keith says, we're 5 races in at KTM. And the point is, he's already up there fighting for the podium. So I think it's all looking good for Jack, to be honest.
And if you live in the nanny state, don't get fined.
You've been warned, Steve. You've been warned. Thank you for your question. Let's head back to Keith's neck of the wood and our good friend Dean. Now, Dean, I've split your question in half because the first part of it we have already answered in a previous podcast, but this is all about Fabio.
The second part of the question is about Fabio Quartararo and his poor performance recently, and the fact he's reverting now back to like a 2021 setup. Okay, guys, have a great day. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, well, I think you've really answered your own question. The fact he's going back to 2021 or even 2022, setups is never a good thing when you're trying to find that default position that you want to start your weekend on. When you roll the bike out the truck, jump on it and stick the first few laps on. As a rider, you really know almost immediately what kind of motorbike you got under you. It's a great feeling when it feels dead good and you're pushing your luck already in them first few minutes. Conversely, of course, it's when you get on it and you think, what the frigging hell am I going to do with this? And multiply that by the fact that everybody is so close now. So to be a tenth or two off means you are going to be, halfway down the grid. Compound that with frustration, which is where we're at with Quartararo now. I think that he's not in the mood anymore for any of this. He's properly unhappy with the way it's going. And quite bizarre, I think, comments that are coming out of some high-up personnel, really, with regards to where Yamaha are going to be. I see that there's even been fairly official from Lynn himself, the managing director of Yamaha, has actually come out, Lynn Jarvis, with the odd comment to say that they're definitely going forward, that they can see that the future in Yamaha, rah 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 rah. It's all these kind of corporate comments, but nothing really that's looking very positive from a racing motorcycle point of view, or from extending their team effort on track or in testing. It's bizarre. I don't know what to make of Yamaha, but you can be fairly sure that Quartararo's mood isn't going to improve, and I doubt if it's going to improve any more in Mugello either.
So I think it just underlies the head scratching at the moment of how to move forward, doesn't it? I mean, Quartararo was slower this year in qualifying at Le Mans and in the race time than he was last year. And that's no rider likes to go slower anyway, do they? But he wasn't the only one. This is the ex-Suzuki guys, they were in the same position. People might have seen this in the story on Crash. But, Rins and Mia didn't match the times they did in qualifying on the Suzuki last year. And we're a long way off, about a second off. Whereas the pole time only changed by about a quarter of a second, just to put it in perspective. But Quartararo was in the same boat. He's going slower than last year. So then you add in Dean's question about going back to the old settings, and it sounds like what Quartararo is saying is we're trying all these new directions, but actually we're not seeing a clear way forward, and we're going back to what we feel comfortable with. And I think he's actually said we're going to keep it like that now. That's the setup. That's the base setup anyway. And I'll just have to ride around the problems. But when you're in a position where you're trying to catch up to the other manufacturers, that's going to be very difficult to do, isn't it? When you keep stepping back, it's not really possible to catch people by stepping back, is it? And they really need something, don't they? They need some breakthrough, and I don't think it's going to come from 21 settings.
They need concessions, Pete, really, don't they? They need to be back. They need to go backwards to go forwards. And in that scenario, you're likely to lose the likes of Quartararo to somewhere else. It's going to be a very interesting set of rules coming up for 2024. That's for sure. I can't wait to see how the Manufacturers Association get together and agree on what is the format for rules moving forward.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Dean, for that. Let's go to Ryan now.
Quick question for Keith, and a video popped up on my feed the other day of Thomas Golob being punched off his motorcycle by Craig Boyce in the World Speedway Finals, which Keith was presenting. Is that the craziest or strangest thing you've seen in motorsport over the years, or is there anything MotoGP or otherwise that tops that? And by the way, save Wolf Speedway, who looks set to lose their home at the end of the season, with the stadium owners prioritising greyhound racing instead.
Bit of a speedway question there. Well, Boise managed it quite well because he managed to get his fist in a shape that he could get it through the aperture of Golob's helmet, because obviously he got his helmet on. So and he knocked him clean off the bike. That might have been at Hackney, the new old, because it only lasted I think a year, Hackney Wick, which again, Speedway loses its. I mean, I went to the final of the Elite League teams thing in Sheffield at Owlerton, and they had like 5,000 people there. And I remember the promoter; she was really happy that they'd had 5,000 people. This was a big deal. Bearing in mind, it was the final of the Elite League year, and half the stadium was closed because it was condemned, because you couldn't get people out of it in the case of a fire or something along those lines. So the whole back straight and area was completely closed. And the other area had this wonderful building in it where you could eat and drink and look out across it. But Speedway, funding-wise, is why we see stadiums close, is because they can't, make enough money to keep the stadiums going. And the dogs obviously get supported by some gambling regime. I think they get so much given to them by the betting offices or whatever it is to keep places going. My uncle used to ride for Wimbledon when Wimbledon Stadium was both a dog track and a speedway track inside there back in the day. So, I mean, I remember it when it was in its heyday and the terraces were full of people and Speedway was in its pomp. But unfortunately now, even, like I say, I was shocked at Owlerton to see the final of the big one of the year, and there was like 5,000 people there. And I thought that was not many. But the lady promoter, she was like over the moon with the attendance. So we all have our troubles, and Speedway have theirs, unfortunately.
Okay, Pete, what have you come across any crazy moments in your line of work in the paddocks over the years?
You know what? I think that one a couple of years back, where the Tech 12 rider got blocked by someone from Biaggi's team leaving the pits. I think that's up there. Yeah, in Moto 3, where the mechanic came and...
That was last year, wasn't it? It wasn't even a couple of years ago. Wasn't that last season? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, last year, yes. Aragon, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, I think that's up there, just for things you don't expect to see at a motorcycle Grand Prix.
Well, you can go Romano Fenati when he grabbed the front brake of Manzi. That was one as well. I mean, I think most of the ones that I've seen that haven't been reported would be the funny ones. Like you've got... We always used to have these races, the two tracks back in the day. You'd always have the trucks, and you'd need to try and get to the next racetrack as quick as you could. I think I've mentioned this before, because there wasn't enough electricity, there wasn't enough water, so you needed to be as close to these outputs as you could possibly be. So you would race to get to the next track, and all the privateers would be, bombing along in their Mercedes 508 vans or whatever it might be, with a row of eggs on the dash, so that you could get to your neck, see the guy next to you and just fire a load of eggs in there so he couldn't see where he was going. He'd have to stop and one day, this guy, I got my window down and didn't see this one coming from behind me, and it came straight in and splattered all over my paperwork that was on the dashboard. And
it can't be real.
So I got in his slipstream and followed him for about the next 150 miles or whatever it was, just kept on. And when we got to the next petrol station, he pulled in and I pulled in, got my fire extinguisher and just fired like a whole load of powder into his truck, and left the plot with this powder all pouring out of the windows of this thing. He was a mate of mine, by the way, Swedish fellow.
Thank God.
We got to Assen and he pulled up, and I've never seen a man madder.
That is insane.
He had to take the entirety of the truck apart to get every bit of powder out of it. It was in every orifice. He
Doesn't sound real. Can't believe that actually happened. What a joke.
There was the one where I remember there's a fellow called Phil Henderson. He used to have a blow-up doll on the top of his truck. And he used to have it inflated to a certain way that when he braked, it would sit up with that kind of startled look on their face. You've probably not got one, Harry.
I just want to say, if you're listening audio only, do seek out the YouTube for the real reenactment of Keith's face there.
I mean, there were all sorts of stupid things that went on back in the day,
Brilliant.
especially behind the scenes. I mean, it's it's amazing how they get embellished over the years as well. If you've never been to one of Stavros's bloody parties, then you, Steve's got them to perfection now. Every story has now got a perfect polish to it. Steve Parrish, I'm talking about, folks.
Brilliant.
Actually, I think he's doing I think his Mad Tours have come to an end. I think he's finished doing his comedy shows now, which is a shame.
Well, never say never. Maybe
Not you.
Kickstart.
You can always listen to him on air. That's a comedy show.
You'll say the same about you on the podcast.
I've worked with him on the Northwest 200, and we've already had accolades you've heard on this podcast. So
I bet. Well, look, thank you so much for all your questions. We haven't got through them all, but I want to end with this. It's not really a question, but I remember Steve and Michelle from last week. Keith gave them a whistle-stop tour for their MotoGP tour in retirement life. They've gotten back in touch. And a lovely message. As you pointed out, with time and age, we've also lost a few friends in the recent past. We're not 35, but 60. We're still healthy and love adventuring. We're American and moved full-time to tropical Mexico 7 years ago. We started talking seriously about doing this tour in October 2019, and well, you know what happened after that. We'll keep you up to date and send significant pictures when we can. Hopefully, we can get to Silverstone and share some beers. So here we go. It's going to be fun. Steve and Michelle. So isn't that fantastic? They've asked if they should have a hashtag. I think it should be hashtag Steve and Michelle, and we'll find you and get in touch on the email. Crash. What's our email? Oh yeah, podcast@crash.net. Say it enough times, but that was brilliant. So thank you, Steve and Michelle. Wishing you all the best for that. But that just about does it for this week's show. Thank you, Keith Huewen. Thank you, Pete McLaren, as always. Sorry if we didn't get to your question. We will eventually get to your question. Make sure you tuned in across crash.net for all the latest news and analysis across the week. Now, some news from us. We won't be back next week due to things beyond our control. For the time being, we will be going to a monthly podcast. So thank you very much for all your support, and we hope it continues. And keep abreast of social media, our individual ones and Crashes, to hear the latest news and, of course, what happens with the podcast. But we thank you for all your questions and everything. You can still get them in, and your comments, just leave them in the inbox on the email, or you can just search Crash MotoGP on all the socials, and you can leave us a review as well, wherever you get your podcasts. And we shall see you, hopefully, in about a month's time. But thank you very much. I've been Harry Benjamin, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.